What is going on, everyone? Welcome into our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and I'm going to look at today a high-stakes showdown in Congress where a proposed ban on hemp products with THC is being called out by bipartisan lawmakers as violating core rules. So what's behind it, who's pushing what, and what it could mean for the industry. But first, a quick shout-out to our presenting sponsor, Dutchie. Running your cannabis retail operation shouldn't feel like juggling fire. Dutchie brings you integrated POS, e-commerce, delivery, and compliance tools so your back end works as cleanly as your front door. If you want to learn more, visit business.dutchie.com and see how you can streamline today. Make sure to check them out. All right, let's get into today's latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. In a recent letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson, Representative James Comer and 26 others argue that a hemp THC ban tucked into a spending appropriations bill would deal a fatal blow to America's hemp sector, and they contend that the language violates congressional rules by rewriting existing law without proper committee markup or public debate. Sounds like a lot, but this is important. To them, this is more than policy, it's procedure. They argue that inserting such a sweeping redefinition of legal hemp into a spending measure flouts the principle that changes to substantive law should go through authorizing committees, not hidden in riders. So the bill's supporter, including some of the House representatives, like Representative Andy Harris, they frame it as correcting loopholes in the hemp THC space. But critics say it's an overreach with real consequences for farmers, small businesses, and the legal cannabinoid supply chain, and they have a point here. And furthermore, the letter contends that the language clearly violates rules against amending existing law via general appropriations. So in other words, you can't rewrite definitions of hemp or consumer products by sneaking it into a budget bill. And again, they have a point here. They also propose that the language would eviscerate dual-use hemp cultivators, meaning grain and cannabinoids, fiber plus cannabinoids, closing off flexibility that many growers depend on. So instead of pushing the ban, these lawmakers propose an alternative, and that is a regulatory framework for consumable hemp products with age limits, labeling rules, testing requirements, and protections against marketing to minors. So this is telling here. So really, you've got a collision between process and how laws should be made and policy. So what happens if you ban THC containing hemp? So let's dig into that more and what it really means. So what it means, well, it's a big deal, because if Congress can quietly redefine what hemp means via a rider and spending bill, they set a dangerous precedent for using appropriations as a stealth tool to remake policy. That's why you see Republicans and Democrats alike, they're pushing back here. So if you look closer, this is not just about hemp, it's about guardrails and legislative power. From an industry standpoint, the potential consequences, let's face it, they're extremely steep. One, farms that plant it expecting the current legal definitions could be forced to destroy crops or lose sales. That's telling. Another is processors, brands, and distribution networks tied to cannabinoid hemp may see inventory become instantly unemployable. Then you have investor confidence, and that would tank. Who wants to back an industry that can be redefined overnight via a hidden rider? That said, the proponents argue they're closing loopholes and protecting public safety. So we also have to ask, are the procedural objections simply a cover for a deeper policy disagreement, or is there an underlying power play here? A lot of divide going on right now in Congress. So let me ask this. When you see a broad redefinition like this inserted into a spending bill, do you read it as just an aggressive policy, or as a warning shot about Congress might trying to bypass oversight in cannabis and hemp regulation going forward? So really, the potential follow-up questions and angles should be this. One, how common is it for an appropriations bill to be used as vehicles for big policy changes, and how might that play out in the future of cannabis and hemp regulation? Another question and angle to ask is, the letter accuses the language of violating rules requiring changes to come through authorizing committees. So how strong is that argument? How could it force removal of the rider on procedural grounds? Then you got number 3. Even if procedural objections succeed, the push for THC bans in hemp is clearly gaining steam. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's going through. But if it does, is this a preview of more aggressive federal regulation, or is this just political posturing? Number 4, if you are drafting a more sensible regulatory approach to intoxicating hemp products, how would you balance that safety and industry viability, especially given the fragmented state-level systems that are already in place, which we've heard a lot about in Texas over these last few months? So really, we should temper the narrative with a few counterpoints. So for existence, supporters of the rider argue that existing definitions and regulations have permitted exploitative or ambiguous products to enter the market unchecked. They see the ban language as necessary to safeguard against consumer harm or youth exposure. Also, some legislators say the ultimate control or definitions of THC and legal thresholds should lie with federal agencies, example the HHS or the USDA, and that this rider translates into clarity and enforcement. With that though, critics warn that the approach is blunt and economically destructive, especially throwing out parts of a nascent industry rather than regulating it responsibly. Also relevant, the Senate had stripped similar language from the agricultural spending bill after procedural pushback led by figures like Senator Rand Paul. But because final legislation often comes from Congress committees reconciling House plus Senate versions, there's worries such language could sneak back in. That's something to think about too. Senators including Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, they've warned that a blanket ban would decimate the hemp industry and undercut regulatory pathways being built in states. They call for regulation, not prohibition, with protections like age limits, marketing controls, and quality standards, something the cannabis industry experiences every single day. So really the fight just isn't right here, it's also in the Senate, and the warning is being echoed across the political spectrum right now. So moving forward, what should you watch for and what should you keep your eye on in the next coming days and weeks? One is conference negotiations. Does the hemp THC rider survive in the fiscal 2026 appropriations package? Are procedural objections in the House recognized, forcing removal of policy language in an appropriations bill? Also, will the alternative regulation proposals from bipartisan members gain traction and become standalone legislation? And really, how will hemp actors, meaning farmers, processors, brands, respond via lobbying, public pressure, or even legal threats? Because if this goes through, lawsuits are coming. So if the rider stays, there's a real possibility of structural damage to the hemp-delivered cannabinoid industry, one that may take years to recover from. So in closing, make no mistakes. When judges, committees, or other stakeholders talk about process matters, they aren't speaking in dry legalese alone. They're warning that how a law is passed can determine how stable it really is. Let's face it, the fight over hemp THC definitions embedded in a spending bill isn't just about the plan, it's about whether Congress believes it can quietly remake markets without debate. And in some ways, that's concerning. So if you see headlines in the next few weeks like Riders Survives Conference or hemp ban included in final spending, don't assume that's the law of the land without digging into how it got there. That is important. Do your due diligence. All right, that's the latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. Thanks for watching and listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below and tell me, if you were rewriting the law governing hemp with THC today, what would be your guiding principle? Love to get your feedback, so leave your comments below. All right, that's it for now. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Thanks again for checking into our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone.